There comes a moment quiet, almost unnoticeable, when the restless search within you simply stops. Not because you found every answer the mind once demanded, but because the need to keep asking begins to dissolve. You are no longer chasing teachings, no longer moving from one voice to another, hoping that the next message will finally complete you. Something within you has settled. You begin to realize that the search itself was born from the assumption that something was missing, that there was a gap between who you are and who you should be. And so you spent your time seeking clarity, seeking peace, seeking truth, seeking yourself. But now, in this stillness, you see it differently. You were never incomplete. You were only unaware of your completeness. This is not an intellectual realization. It is not something you repeat to convince yourself. It is something you feel deeply, naturally, without effort. It is the quiet knowing that does not need to announce itself. You no longer feel the urgency to prove anything, to understand everything, or to figure life out all at once. There is a calm confidence that replaces the old urgency. Where you once questioned every step, you now move with an inner certainty. Decisions become simpler, not because life has fewer complexities, but because you are no longer divided within yourself. You trust the feeling that arises from within more than the noise that comes from outside. And in that trust, you find a kind of freedom that cannot be taught. You may still read, you may still listen, you may still explore, but it is no longer from a place of lack. It is from a place of curiosity, of expansion, of enjoyment. You are no longer trying to become, you are simply expressing what you already are. And that changes everything. Even the questions that once consumed you begin to lose their importance. Not because they were wrong, but because they are no longer necessary. You understand now that truth is not something you collect piece by piece. It is something you recognize when you stop looking for it outside of yourself. And in this recognition, a profound peace emerges. A peace that does not depend on circumstances, outcomes, or approval. A peace that remains even when life moves, shifts, and changes around you. Because it is not rooted in the world, that is rooted in your awareness of being. You are no longer the seeker standing at the door. You are the one who has realized there was never a door to begin with. There comes a stage in your inner journey when something subtle begins to shift in the way you experience life. The same situations may still appear, the same words may still be spoken by others. The same challenges may still arise, but something within you no longer reacts in the way it once did. It is as if an invisible weight has been lifted from your nervous system, and for the first time, you are not being pulled in every direction by what happens around you. Things that once had the power to disturb your peace begin to pass through you without leaving the same imprint. A comment that would have once triggered anger now feels distant and almost irrelevant. A misunderstanding that would have once pulled you into emotional chaos now dissolves more quickly, as if it cannot find a place to settle within you. You are still aware, still present, but no longer entangled. This does not mean you have become indifferent or disconnected from life. It means you have become anchored. Within yourself, there is a deeper center in you now, a place that is not easily shaken. Emotions still arise because you are human, but they no longer take control of your entire being. They move through like waves, and you remain the ocean beneath them, vast, steady, unaffected in your core. You begin to notice that reaction itself feels unnecessary. Where there was once urgency to defend, explain, or prove your position, there is now a quiet pause. In that pause, something new is born. This choice, you are no longer driven by impulse. You respond from awareness instead of reacting from conditioning. And in that space, relationships begin to feel lighter, situations feel less heavy, and even conflict loses its intensity. It is not that life has become easier on the surface, but your relationship to life has changed completely. The same external world no longer has the same access to your inner state. You are not as easily pulled into emotional storms because you are no longer identified with every passing thought or feeling. And slowly, you realize something even deeper: you were never meant to be controlled by your emotional reactions in the first place. Those triggers were never your identity, they were simply patterns that once held your attention. Now, they begin to fade, not through force, but through awareness. You see them for what they are, and in that seeing, their grip weakens. A natural calm begins to settle within you. Not a forced calm, not a practiced calm, but a calm that arises because nothing within you is fighting anymore. You are no longer at war with your experience. You are simply witnessing it, moving with it, and remaining rooted in something far deeper than any passing emotional wave. And in that stillness, you understand that freedom was never about controlling the world around you. It was about no longer being controlled by it. There is a quiet turning point in your inner journey where something fundamental begins to shift in the way you relate to the world. The need to be seen, approved of, or validated by others starts to lose its hold on you. Not in a sudden or dramatic way, but gradually, almost silently, as if a burden you had been carrying for years is slowly being set down without effort. You begin to notice how much of your earlier energy was spent unconsciously seeking confirmation from outside yourself. A compliment would lift you, a criticism would shake you, and the opinions of others would quietly shape the way you saw your own worth. It was as if your sense of identity was scattered across many voices, and you were constantly trying to gather it back through external approval. But now, something different is happening. You still hear the voices, you still see the reactions of others, but they no longer define you in the same way. There is a growing sense that your value is not something that can be given or taken away by anyone outside of you. It is not dependent on applause, agreement, or recognition. It is simply known from within. This shift is subtle at first. You may even catch yourself waiting for validation out of habit, but something in you no longer fully leans on it. The moment passes more quickly. The inner center begins to stabilize. You realize that the approval you once sought was never truly able to complete you, only temporarily soothe the deeper uncertainty that is now dissolving. As this awareness deepens, you stop performing for acceptance. You stop editing yourself just to be liked. You stop shaping your truth to fit into the expectations of others. Not because you have become distant or detached, but because authenticity begins to feel more natural than approval ever did. You would rather be aligned within yourself than accepted without it. There is a quiet confidence that begins to emerge, not loud, not arrogant, but steady. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself constantly or prove your worth through achievement or comparison. You understand that your existence does not require justification. You are here, and that is enough. Even relationships begin to feel different. You are no longer reaching for validation in every interaction. You are not depending on others to mirror back your value so that you can believe it. Instead, you meet people from a place of fullness, not emptiness. And from that fullness, connection becomes more genuine, more relaxed, more real. You start to see that the constant need for validation was never a sign of weakness. It was simply a misunderstanding of where worth actually comes from. And as that misunderstanding dissolves, a deeper freedom takes its place. A freedom where you no longer ask the world to tell you who you are. And in that quiet freedom, you finally rest in the knowing that you were never lacking anything to begin with. There comes a point in your inner unfolding where something soft but profound begins to happen. You stop arguing with life. Not outwardly at first, but inwardly. The constant push and pull, the silent resistance to what is, begins to fade. You are no longer in a battle with the moment you are in. You are simply here with it. For so long, you may have believed that peace comes when life finally matches your expectations. When people change, when circumstances improve, when everything aligns the way you imagined it should. But in this deeper shift, you begin to see clearly that this waiting was its own form of struggle, a subtle refusal of this present moment. And now that refusal begins to dissolve. You notice that reality does not need to be fought in order to be understood. It does not need to be resisted in order to be transformed. Something within you relaxes its grip. Instead of tightening against life, you begin to soften into it. Even when things are not as you would prefer, there is less inner tension, less inner conflict. You are no longer splitting yourself into one part demanding change, the other suffering from what already is. This is not resignation. It is not giving up on life or settling for less. It is a deeper kind of intelligence, one that no longer wastes energy resisting what has already unfolded. You begin to realize that resistance does not create clarity, it creates suffering. And in the absence of that resistance, clarity begins to emerge on its own. You find yourself meeting situations more directly without the layer of mental argument running in the background. A difficult moment arises, and instead of immediately labeling it as wrong or unacceptable, you are able to be with it as it is. In that simple presence, something unexpected happens. The intensity of the situation often softens on its own. Life becomes less like something you are constantly trying to control and more like something you are learning to move with. There is a rhythm to it, and you are no longer standing outside that rhythm trying to force it into a different pattern. You are part of it now, flowing with it, trusting it in a way you may not fully explain but deeply feel. Even your desire for change begins to feel different. It is no longer rooted in rejection of the present moment, but in a natural unfolding from it. You are not trying to escape where you are. You are allowing what is here to be the ground from which something new can emerge. And in this quiet acceptance, something remarkable happens. You discover that peace was never waiting at the end of change. It was always available within your willingness to stop resisting what already is. There comes a stage in your inner awakening where the idea of who you are begins to loosen. The fixed image you once held of yourself, your story, your roles, your labels, your past experiences starts to feel less solid, less absolute. It is not that your life disappears, but your identification with it begins to soften. You are no longer confined inside the boundaries of a single, rigid identity. For so long, you may have lived as if you were a defined character in a fixed script. You carried a name, a history, a set of beliefs about what you can or cannot be. You shaped yourself around experiences that happened long ago, and without realizing it, you kept reinforcing a limited version of yourself. But now, something in you begins to question the permanence of that definition. You start to notice that you are not as fixed as you once believed. In different situations, different aspects of you naturally emerge. You can be quiet in one moment and expressive in another, strong in one moment and deeply sensitive in another. And rather than seeing these as contradictions, you begin to recognize them as expressions of something much larger than any single label. The boundaries of identity begin to dissolve. You are no longer trying to fit yourself into one narrow definition of who I am supposed to be. Instead, there is a growing sense of fluidity within you. You allow yourself to be many things without needing to choose only one version of yourself to exist permanently. Even your past begins to lose its authority over you. It is no longer the script that determines your future. It becomes more like a collection of experiences you have lived through, not the limits of what you can become. You stop saying, I am like this because I have always been like this, and instead you begin to feel that you are constantly unfolding. There is a quiet liberation in this realization. You are no longer trapped inside a fixed personality. You are not confined to old patterns just because they were once familiar. You begin to sense that identity itself is not something solidate, is something alive, something that moves, expands, and reshapes itself moment by moment. And as this understanding deepens, fear begins to loosen its grip. The fear of change, the fear of becoming something unknown, the fear of losing yourself, all of it begins to fade. Because you realize there is no single self that can be lost. There is only awareness expressing itself in endless forms. You become more open, more adaptable, more present with whatever version of yourself is needed in the moment. Life no longer demands that you remain the same. It invites you to evolve, to expand, to express without limitation. And in that expansion, you understand something profound. You were never meant to be a fixed identity. You are something far greater, something that cannot be contained. There comes a gentle settling at the end of this inner unfolding where everything begins to feel simpler again. Not because life has become less complex on the surface, but because you are no longer adding unnecessary layers of thought, resistance, and interpretation to every moment. You return almost naturally to the simplicity of being here. For so long, your attention may have been pulled into the past and the future replaying what was, anticipating what might be, constantly moving away from the only place life is actually happening. But now, something in you begins to rest. The urgency to figure everything out slowly fades, and what remains is a quiet awareness of the present moment. You start to notice how much energy was once spent in mental movement. The constant analysis, the internal commentary, the endless search for meaning in everything. And now, instead of being caught in that stream, you find yourself stepping out of it. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer carry you away in the same way. You see them, and they pass. There is a return to what is immediate. The sound of a voice, the feeling of your breath, the presence of another person, the simple act of being alive in this moment. These things, which were once overlooked in the rush of seeking and becoming, now carry a quiet depth. You begin to realize that nothing essential was ever missing from the present moment itself. Simplicity is not something you create. It is what remains when unnecessary complexity falls away. When you are no longer trying to fix everything in your mind, when you are no longer projecting yourself endlessly into the future, life becomes surprisingly direct. You are here, and that is enough. Even your desires begin to feel simpler, not driven by lack or urgency, but arising naturally from presence. You are no longer chasing life as something separate from you. You are participating in it as it unfolds. And in that participation, there is a natural ease, a quiet harmony that does not need effort to maintain. You also begin to feel less divided within yourself. There is not one part of you trying to reach somewhere else while another part resists where you are. There is just wholeness in the moment you are in, a sense that nothing is missing right now that needs to be found elsewhere. And in this simplicity, presence becomes your natural state, not something you practice, not something you force, but something you return to effortlessly. It is always here, beneath the noise, beneath the thoughts, beneath the stories. You realize that all the searching, all the complexity, all the inner struggle was pointing you here all along. And now you are no longer moving away from it. You are simply here, and that is everything.